Welcome back to GoDoBe EmPowerMe. I'm Joe Guskowski, your host, your guide, and your coach throughout this journey. In today's session, we're going to do some final prep before we go into detail on the 4 foundations of personal excellence and achievement. So let's start by doing something that we're already familiar with, something simple. Do you remember the thought experiment that we did several modules back? Well, let's do it again. Imagine for a moment that we were farmers, and we have this beautiful large field in which we can plant any crops that we want. Now let's say for a moment that we wanted to enjoy some nice sweet corn in the coming harvest. You can pick some other fruit or vegetable if corn is not your thing. Doesn't really matter. So here's the question I want to ask. What kind of a seed should we plant if we want to have corn at the harvest? Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Joe, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? To which I would simply reply, yes, it is obvious. And yet so many people are not planting the right seeds for them to enjoy the kind of harvest that they really desire. Now, doesn't that seem strange? This little question right here brings us to a critical consideration. So why is it that so many people are not doing those things that are necessary, at least to bring them down the road that they want to travel along? Why aren't they? Why are so many of their actions inconsistent with their desired goals? So let's begin to address that this way by reviewing how farming works. I mean, what are the basic things to being a good farmer and to having a great harvest? Seems like a fairly simple process, right? Well, first, we choose what we want to plant, the kind of seed. Then, we plan out the steps necessary before we actually go out and plant it. And then, of course, we plant it. Next, we nurture it. We give it lots of sunshine, water, and make sure that the soil is healthy. And in this way, our crop will grow in the ways that we want it to. And then finally, at the end of the season, when it's all done, comes the harvest and our rewards. Now, what's notable here is that creating a great life experience is actually very similar, at least in terms of a process, to farming. The key idea is that there's a process to both of them. The process goes as, first, we decide what we want. Then we put a plan together. Finally, we take the steps necessary to begin and execute or follow that plan. And of course, once we begin, we follow it. We follow our plan. We nurture it, which means for us, we take regular steps, we get support when we need, feedback when we need, we fine-tune our plan as necessary, and so on, until eventually the whole plan comes to fruition and we reach our goal. Now, let's go back to the question of why aren't most people reaching their goals? Well, simply put, something must be missing, or whatever it is that they're doing isn't right. Since we know that successful farming or accomplishing any goals has a process or steps, then either the process or the steps are flawed, or how the steps are actually taken. Maybe that's what's flawed. Maybe some people believe they don't need a plan, or maybe they have one, but they're not following it properly. Or maybe they just believe that all I have to do is just wish and want it or hope for it, and it will happen. That somehow their reward, my reward, will miraculously appear in my life. Imagine a farmer doing that, just standing there in front of their field, wishing, hoping, praying that something is going to happen and his or her crop is going to miraculously appear at the end of the season. I don't think that person would make for a very successful farmer. What do you think? Let's go a little bit deeper here and consider for a moment that if it were actually possible, that things could simply happen because we hoped, wished, or merely thought about it. What would that mean for our reality out here? If anyone at any moment could wish anything they wanted into existence? Well, maybe you've considered the idea of the multiverse, of having multiple universes exist at once. If you thought that was a freaky idea, well, this wishing or wish-filled universe where things just happen because we wish them into existence, then that would be an absolutely chaotic cosmic nightmare. So let's get back to reality, back to the first challenge that most people face. And that is that they don't realize that there's either a process or they're not doing it properly. They don't realize that success has structure and a blueprint that needs to be followed. The next challenge is that that structure has stages or steps that need to be followed in the right way and at the right time. Think of a blueprint as having different levels, different layers. And each level or layer is a floor. That's the various stage. And certain floors need to be built first before we get to the next floor. You can't jump to the third floor if you haven't finished the second floor. It doesn't work that way. You need the foundations of the previous floor. Now, since we are designing our future, in other words, we're creating that blueprint, that means that we must understand this process, and then we must take those steps correctly, whatever they are. By the time we're done, we'll be a master corn farmer, or more aptly, a master at creating our own harvest or whatever great life experience that we choose to pursue. Now, I want to take a moment here and share with you some insight from two historical figures. You may have heard about them, or you may have even read some of their writings before. Let's begin with the first historical figure. His name is Lao-Tzu. He wrote a little book called the Tao Te Ching. In the simplest of terms, the Tao means the way. It is a reflection on the way things go, move, work in our universe. The idea of going with the flow. Somewhere around 2,500 to 3,000 years ago, Lao-Tzu taught that the way to be successful in life was through what he referred to as non-struggle action, not inaction. Inaction is different. It just means that you do nothing. In Lao-Tzu's world, his idea was that harmonizing or by harmonizing one's personal will with the natural patterns of the world or the universe around us, it helps us to lead transformative lives. He taught us that to be the instrument of universal law or truth, rather than to try to fight against it and to try to force our path, our way on the world around us. He says that this second approach, the forcing our way, is futile. It's self-destructive. It results in disharmony, disappointment, and ultimately in sadness. Take a look at the world around us today. What are most people's lives like? I think there's a good descriptor right there. Now, Lao-Tzu teaches us that life is not a struggle, but it is a puzzle. It's not a battle to be fought, but it is a game to be played. A game that once we understand the rules is much easier to win at, and in our case, to be successful in. The second of the historical figures I want to bring your attention to is Sun Tzu. Now, Sun Tzu was a contemporary of Lao-Tzu, and even though they have the same last portion of their name, they're not related in any particular way. Now, Sun Tzu studied the ideas that Lao-Tzu presented in his Tao, and he then applied many of these same ideas in his own writing, his own little treatise called The Art of War. In the simplest terms, the art of war is more about conquering powerful adversaries. It's about military battles and conquests, about overcoming insurmountable odds and defeating significant challenges. Now, Sun Tzu was often consulted by the smaller dynasties at that time when they were being threatened or attacked by larger dynasties with much bigger armies. Now, even though this book, The Art of War, was essentially about strategies for military battles, most of the ideas can be equally applied to life in general, or at least in terms of those significant challenges that we might happen to face from time to time. Now, Sun Tzu was able to apply Lao-Tzu's ideas of how to be in balance with the way and the world around us. And he then turned that balance into specific techniques that could be used to vanquish larger opponents, or in general, the bigger challenges that we face today. Now remember, for us, hopefully we're not fighting in any military battles or anything like that. Instead, our enemy is whatever the challenges are that we face today, those obstacles before us. Now, when I first read The Art of War, there was one idea that stood out and resonated that said, this is really the key to what's required to be successful today. And I'm going to share that with you right here. Then we're going to move forward, and we're going to start to study this idea in a lot more detail in the modules that unfold. Now, for us, we're going to need to change something in this passage. We need to change the word enemy, that's Lao-Tzu's term. For us, what we're going to use is external environment or the challenges that we face. That's all we're going to do. Sun Tzu, 3,000 years ago, wrote the following. He said, if you know yourself and you know your enemy, or in our words, competition or external environment, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself, but not your enemy, for every victory gained, you will suffer a defeat. If you know neither yourself nor the enemy, then you will succumb. You will lose, without a doubt. 3,000 years ago, Sun Tzu basically gave us the secret to being successful in life. He said there are two things that we need to know before we need not fear the result of 100 battles, or in our case, to win or create whatever great life experience that we want today. The first thing we need to know is our enemy. And remember, for us, that's the external environment or the challenges that we're facing, the thing in the world that we have to deal with. That's the first thing. This we're going to refer to as the outer world as we go forward. The world around us, the people, the events, the knowledge, the situation, and anything that's external to us. The second thing he said that we need to know in order to be victorious in the end is ourselves. This is the inner world, the world inside of us, who we are, what we desire, what we value, and so on. He tells us that until we know both of these, we are not in balance and we will not be successful. So let's take a step back and do a quick review. We talked about farming earlier, and we recognize that successful farming has structure and process to it, very much like success does as well. Next, I introduced you two of my favorite authors, Lao-Tzu and Sun Tzu, and both of them tell us that we need to act in harmony with the way. Sun Tzu also tells us that if we understand both the inner world and the outer world, then we too can consistently achieve what's really important and meaningful for us. So that brings us to the end of today's session. There's some important ideas that we actually introduced earlier, and I do want you to think about them. So as part of your takeaway, what I'd like you to do is to get yourself either an electronic copy or a paper copy of one or both of the two writings, Lao-Tzu's The Tao Te Ching and or Sun Tzu's The Art of War, and start to read through them slowly. They're both really small books, but please take your time. There's no rush to try to finish them. They are both chock full of thought-provoking insights and ideas that your brain is going to need time to reflect on. So I don't recommend trying to read either one of them in one sitting, especially when it comes to the Tao Te Ching. Some of those ideas you're probably going to have to read 3 or 4 times before they start to sink in a little bit deeper. Our final thought from today is actually from Lao-Tzu, one of the two authors that we discussed earlier. And here's what Lao-Tzu tells us. Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. Until I see you next time, have an absolutely amazing day. See you very, very soon.